Welcome back to CYBERUKTV, here from Glasgow. I'm Darragh McElroy from the National Cybersecurity Centre, and today I'm joined by Raj Cheema from KPMG. Hi Raj.
Hi Darragh.
Thank you very much for joining us here today. Can you tell us, what's your role at KPMG?
So my name is Raj Cheema. I am a cyber and digital trust partner, and I look after the business focusing on healthcare across the UK and EMA.
And as part of that, Raj, obviously you'll have seen over the years organisations and heard about this, organisations spending millions of pounds on cyber every year. Shouldn't we be seeing a greater impact from all that expenditure?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's one that I'm actually constantly tackling, because we need the frameworks in order to ensure that we're doing the right things. But I think they often become blockers to actually being successful at becoming operationally more resilient. So I think quite often what we're doing is we're looking at assurance rather than risk reduction. And often that's because the boards want it. They want to be able to measure something successfully, say, what's my latest NIST score? Where am I going with my cybersecurity? And they want to be able to quantify the level of money they're spending on cybersecurity. But in reality, that doesn't necessarily reduce operational impact of a cyber event, a cyber threat actually happening.
What would make that expenditure on cybersecurity more effective?
I think thinking thoroughly about business impact is really important. Often cyber's left for the CISO. CISO comes with a budget then gets approved by someone that has a financial hat on. He needs to see outcomes that are achieved by spending that budget, and the cycle continues on. And I think we end up in a conversation which means we're fitting the mold of what typically is required rather than the mold of what we need here, which is risk reduction. In terms of how we change, I think we need to stop thinking about coverage and be more focused on criticality. Often we're spending a lot of money on prevention tools, increasing NIST scores or scores when it comes to cybersecurity. We're also saying that a breach is inevitable. Yet the amount of money spent on prevention rather than the ability to be resilient as an organization is quite considerably different.
And within that, is a one cyber risk most organisations believe they fix, but in reality, that there's still a gaping hole where that risk hasn't been addressed.
Yeah, my view, based on what I've seen in healthcare, but then also in other sectors like transport, when it comes to incident response and recovery, it's the one that I don't feel actually people are having enough conversations about, and activities can be more joined up when it comes to organizational resilience.
So response and recovery.
Absolutely.
You were talking about preparation. What do you think organizations should be doing?
So especially when it comes to response and recovery, right? So if I focus on that element, I think we're not talking about restoring trustworthy services at pace and under real conditions. And I think that is the one measure that we need to fundamentally start to shift and change.
So if someone was going to take something from this conversation we're having, that would be it, yeah?
Well, I would say that if we had one metric, it would be time to restore critical services to an acceptable level of trust under a cyber scenario. And I can expand on that.
Please do, yeah.
Some of the key things that I think that we can do better is embedding cybersecurity into the way that organizations operate. For me in healthcare, it's fundamentally important, right? It makes a difference between someone getting the treatment at the right time versus not. And in that statement that I made, notice it doesn't say anything about cyber threats, like someone's going to attack or reducing the time that it takes to detect an attack. No, I think it's about restoring services. And I think it forces a couple of things. It forces you to not think about patch coverage or mean time to detect or maturity scores. And it instead creates a different language, which is you have to prioritize. It will make sure that you are integrating people, governance, process, and technology together, which often isn't done. It will mean that it's empirically testable, something that you can actually turn around to a board and say, it will take us 4 hours to recover services. When we simulated this type of attack happening, we think it can happen and we can restore services in 4 hours. Everyone understands that. It's very different to talking about the latest tooling and what it will offer us. And then finally, I think this becomes a legible conversation for boards to be having. There's something about cybersecurity seen as a dark art sometimes, or a black box when it comes to the spend that we do in money. Everyone knows it's really important, but actually, I don't necessarily think we have the language right now to be having a more fruitful conversation at board levels.
The way you boil that down, you make it sound very simple, and I'm sure it is, and it's just having those clear indicators of what needs to be done. Is exercising a big part of that? And as a follow-up question, is a one metric that you could judge organisations by? You were talking about boards there a moment ago. Is a one metric that you think, you could point to the board and say, look, this is the one thing?
So exercising is fundamentally important. I think some of the issues that I've seen with exercising is normally boards don't have the time to actually invest. However, if an attack happened, the person with the decision is probably going to be someone at that board. And if that person doesn't know whether they can limit the spread of an attack and they are allowed to turn off services to these types of functions, what are they going to do? And that level of paralysis means you're adding time to your recovery time and point objectives. So I think exercising is important. The second thing I would say on exercising is the amount of times that I've seen exercising on water not being available in a hospital is many times. I think the likelihood of water not being available in a hospital versus actually having a cyber attack or someone trying to breach your services, there's a marked difference. Yet how many times has someone actually had an exercise that thought about the different aspects of a cyber attack and how it would impact someone?
That's fascinating.
Because I don't necessarily think it's still that sort of this attack happens, therefore how would we respond in an exercise anymore? There's a much more multifaceted element to it. And organizations don't often sit in the same room anymore. So how are you actually dealing with that, actually in their actual scenarios of where they are in homes or in different locations across the country?
So it's taking the time to dedicate time to think about these things and then put it into action and actually exercise it,
Yeah.
Not just a lot of chin scratching and just, but actually getting on with it. So finally, Raj, we talked about there about metrics. Is there one metric that you think by which an organization could be judged?
Yes, I think there is, right? So time to restore critical services to an acceptable level of trust under a cyber scenario. And I mentioned earlier, it's like you don't hear me talking about the number of threats that you're getting or any other type of measure that makes it a much more cyber-focused conversation. I think my aim here is that if we could think about a metric like that, it would force prioritization, force the integration of people, technology, governance, and process. It would create a legible conversation for boards where they can actually test and challenge more effectively, because everyone understands I won't have an hour of a finance system versus I won't have an hour of systems that support critical care.
Yeah.
That's a conversation everyone can contribute to.
Well, Raj, that's been really useful pointers. You've broken it down so simply. I'm really thank you very much for your time. So, Raj, enjoy the rest of Cyber UK and good luck with it all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.